Hello and welcome to the Property Roundup here on iPropertyRadio with myself, Carol Tallon, the show where we chat to industry experts to get a view on activity on the ground and to learn about new trends emerging. This show is sponsored by daft.ie, Ireland's most visited property website. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Michelle Kealy, Divisional Director with Lisney Sotheby's International Realty. Michelle, thank you so much for joining me today.
Good morning, Carol. I'm very delighted to be with you.
Michelle, I think in the spirit of full disclosure, I need to tell our audience that you are the estate agent that I have known longest in Ireland, because I've known you for, will I age us both if I say in excess of 45
I don't
years?
mind. I don't mind at all, because no one believes me when I actually tell them my real age, because I look so beautiful and young, you know?
So then I'll pretend it's 20 years, but you and I know we can double it. And that is because obviously we both come from the same very, very tiny village in County Wicklow, Grange Con. So it's always lovely to be able to catch up and exchange the local gossip. So I'm particularly delighted to be talking to you today. But one of the things that I don't know, even though I've known you for a long time, is actually how you came to be in real estate. So you might just kind of talk us through your journey into working in property.
So, Carol, when I was about 16, like us all, trying to think about career paths, and at that age, you kind of really don't have a clue. I started off, actually, would you believe, wanting to be a jockey, because as you know from Grange Con, there's horses around us and, you know, racehorse trainers and so forth. But when I investigated that option, I realized being 5'9" and being fond of food wasn't going to work out very well for me.
That must be a Grange Con trait as well. We wear them tall there.
We do, yeah, we do. So that was kind of a no-no. I thought about being an air hostess, and I thought about being a model. Again, you know, things that were going to, you know, be impacted by my, I suppose, food choices, which were at that stage junk food and all that sort of thing that goes along with being a teenager. So Mum sat me down and said, look, what do you want to do? And I need to figure this out. I need to give you guidance here as much as I can, but I don't want to push you into anything either at the same time that you're not going to be happy with. I want you to be happy. So she also was a lady who loved to encourage us children to read books. And she gave me this book by Patricia Scanlon called Apartment 3B. And it was about three girls living in Dublin. And one of them was a real estate agent. And she spoke about her day, you know, in a kind of a fictional way. She's very like Marion Keyes as a writer, you know, put fun into it. And whilst I was reading about this lady, I was kind of going, oh, one day she's in the office with her lovely makeup on, hair done, high heels, kind of selling Sunset. And then the next day she's out on a site wearing a pair of Wellington boots and dealing with different type of vendors, buyers alike. I thought, okay, this sounds like an interesting job. So off I went to an open day up in Bowton Street, DIT, and sat down, and I saw this lovely female auctioneer, and I thought, right, this is now starting to live up to what I expected from the book. I thought, okay, let's investigate this further, and met with my career guidance teacher, applied for the course in Bowton Street, and I also applied for the course in Limerick as a backup, because I thought, well, look, if I don't get the points for Bowton Street, I can always maybe go to Limerick. Unfortunately, I didn't get enough points for Bowton Street because I wasn't a student. I wasn't very fond of knuckling down. So I ended up going to Limerick, did the 4-year course there. 1 year was out on work experience, was the best year I ever had. I worked for a company called Spain, Courtney Doyle, and the commercial agency side of things, and finished in 1998, got my degree, went to Chicago for a few months to find myself, had a great time on a J1, and then came back that Christmas. There weren't many jobs at the time, and never really are that time of the year in the industry. Agents tend to hold off until the springtime before they start recruiting. So went to work in Bank of Ireland for a month or two, kept sending out my CVs, knocking on doors. And finally I got an invitation for an interview with Lisney, as we were known back then. Had 2 interviews and got the job and started in March 99 and have been there pretty much ever since.
Wow, that's a long time with one company. You know, how has that seemed? Because obviously we've seen Lisney transition, but we've seen agencies, the makeup of agencies really transition, particularly during the crash, you know, when actually teams would have really been let go and essentially were paying desk space for the privilege of working on property. So you've seen a lot during that time. Talk to me about maybe the transition, not just of the market, but actually of the business of a state agency.
I suppose I'll start with the market first and maybe then move on to the evolution of our industry in that 25-year period. So when I started off, having come fresh out of college, well, bar my 6-month sabbatical in Chicago, I understood there was a 7-year cycle. You had 7 years good time and you had 7 years bad time. And, you know, what I mean by that is you had an active market for 7 years and then a recession or cooling off period would happen for the following 7 years. Looking back now, I would safely say that never happened in my career. I have worked in the most unpredictable markets that could possibly have ever existed. Between when I started off in 99, that 2 years later, we had the dot-com crash, we had foot and mouth disease, then we had September the 11th. Interest rates then were dropped to an all-time low in 2002 to counteract what happened in 2001 with those 3 unprecedented incidents. And that fed into then the market just taking off up until kind of 2006, 2007. Then move on to the biggest crash. I mean, banks collapsing, bank crash, lending not happening for a couple of years. The market then reviving itself in 2013, 2014, prices going back up by 30% in the first 6 months of 2014, because of the high percentage of cash buyers as against those who were getting loans. And then we roll on to 4 years ago, and you throw COVID in on top of that. That's after we had Brexit. So all these different anomalies that just have distorted that 7-year kind of rule that I was trained in college to understand. That's how it works. So I've learned a lot over those last 25 years. The one thing I've also equally learned over the last 25 years is that in our world, you must evolve, you must change all the time. It's a forever changing business. So 25 years ago, I used to sit down on a Friday night in front of the TV watching, I think it was Pat Kenny, or maybe it was still Gay Byrne, can't remember, it's that long ago. And I used to stick photographs on brochures for the open viewings the next day.
Yeah, that's not that long ago. I think newer agents coming in today can't believe that's how it used to happen.
Oh yeah, we used to send down photographs to Fuji. I was based at the time in our Dunleary office, and we'd send the photographs down to Fuji and saying, "Look, Avril, would you mind printing up 100 photographs or 200 photographs?" And you went, back home that evening, or you'd try and fit it into the work time, but usually you just didn't have the time. And you'd go home with your Pritt stick and you'd stick the photographs onto the brochures. What do you think about it? Google had just become a thing. Emails had just become a thing. Mobile phones had just become a thing. Mobile phones didn't take photographs. You were barely a text message that was brand new. Wow, you can text somebody. The internet had just become a thing. My home had just started. And we were evolving then to work with the demands of the buyers and to the vendors to promote their properties. Also back then, the Irish Times, we would never have put the price in the Irish Times for a property. And the reason for that was to encourage phone calls so we could get a gauge on the interest in the properties, because we didn't really...
Was that a Lisney specific tactic, or would that have been the industry norm?
That would be from memory, that would be the industry norm. And then as the internet started becoming more relevant in our world, we then felt, okay, look, let's start telling people what we're guiding for auctions, because back in that day, auctions were an option of choice. It was, you didn't even think about selling properties by private treaty. Low percentage certainly, but you tended to auction everything back then.
But again, I'm wondering, is this, Lisney would have certainly had the reputation, and arguably still has the reputation for having, for certainly dealing with the higher end of the market. So that part of that is down to the geographic locations in which you're working, but also actually there's a certain level or quality of property. And do you think, is that something that maybe is almost a misconception about Lisney, or is that very much the quality of property that the company has always aimed to carry?
I would say we've always aimed to carry. Now, of course, we sell properties at the affordable levels too. However, we would, I suppose, aim towards the middle to upper end of the market. Yes, and we always have.
And in terms of geographic areas, from the time you start, and I know you mentioned that you were originally with the Dún Laoghaire branch, what would be the geographic areas that you've worked in and where you're working today?
So we made a decision there 5 years ago to close the office in Dún Laoghaire, and we out of that opened 2 offices so we could ensure full exposure in the areas we were covering. That being the Blackrock office on the Mount Marion Avenue, and then the office in Dalkey on Railway Road. So the areas that we would cover in our office, I'm based in Dalkey, and the areas we would cover would be Dún Laoghaire, Glasstool, Sandycove, Glenageary, Dalkey, Killiney, Shankill, Rathmichael, parts Cabinteely, and again some parts we looked after then by our office in Blackrock, and they tend to focus on the Blackrock, Monkstown, Stillorgan areas, and then obviously with the office in Leeson Street then, who would look after the Dublin 4 area, along with our Ranelagh office. Then they look after Dublin 6, and then my colleague Barry is based in our Northside office. So we've got a good spread across the Dublin city.
But you've also got a good spread from, we've talked about, obviously the crash was really a time of utter upheaval. But I remember in the fallout after the crash, there were some areas that were really struggling. So the recovery didn't happen at the same time right across. So where we might have seen certainly prime residential areas in South Dublin improve. I know areas like Rathmichael particularly would have been much slower to recover. There would have been public transport hadn't really improved. I'm not sure how much better it is today, but obviously even areas like Leopardstown coming out as far as Cabinteely, like they're areas that have really only become highly desirable in the last 5, 6, 7 years.
Yeah, they've always been, I suppose, desirable in the last 10 years, but more so now, I suppose, it's down to affordability. I mean, prices are now back to, in a majority of instances, back to where they would have been at the peak of 2006. Now, there are many houses that aren't back there, and they are houses that fetched phenomenal figures. I should never have gotten those figures in 2006, and that was just fed into by the credit bubble that was just handing out money willy-nilly, basically. So yes, I would say those areas are now becoming more popular, more in demand, based on affordability and getting maybe more value for their money. The other thing.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
No, well, the other thing too, Carol, is that we're now finding a lot of people having having the option for hybrid working. So, this idea that, if I move out there, I'm going to spend the next hour and a half trying to commute into my office in, say, Grand Canal Dock, 5 days a week, that'll wear me out by the time I get to Friday. I won't be able to enjoy my weekend. Where now the focus is on getting your life, work-life balance more equal. So, by moving out to, say, Leopardstown, you mentioned as an area, or Rathmichael, now you have that option that you don't have to be in a car 5 days a week. You can work from home 2 or 3 days and maybe take that view that you just go in for 2 or 3 days and sacrifice being in the traffic early on a Wednesday morning, say, and home late on a Wednesday night, but you can make up for it by being at home then and not having to commute, say, 2 or 3 days a week.
Yeah, and look, we know that that's one of the really interesting shifts that have happened. And, you know, I'm in the fortunate position where I get to speak to agents all around the country. And I always love when we can tap into maybe some of the rural agents in areas, particularly west of the Shannon, because it's an interesting perspective on what's happening for people, say, who are employed by Dublin or Cork based businesses, but they're living 2, maybe up to 3 hours away from the office, and they've done it or maybe relocated in recent years since COVID on the expectation that hybrid working or even fully remote working, but certainly hybrid working is here to stay. But we don't, I mean, that's the assumption, but we don't actually know that yet because it's still quite early days. And I know companies, companies have made declarations like, okay, we're going to wait for another year and then we will decide what our hybrid working policy is going to be. So actually, I feel like that's not fully decided yet. And we're not really sure how that's going to play out. But I'm always interested to know what's happening at a very kind of granular level when we look at local marketplace. So, you know, talk to me a little bit about the people who are, first of all, buying and who's in the marketplace at the moment. Do you have a mix of first-time buyers? Are there people trading up, trading down? Do you have any or many investors?
The area that I'm based in, we wouldn't have that many investors, and there's no appetite there to buy a second home where I'm based. The reason for that, I would expect, is the price point, and then the rent, even though rents are high, the yield doesn't make sense. There's no real, I suppose, carrot there for someone to invest in a property out in the kind of Dalkey Monkstown.
Yeah, well, you're saying that in terms of price, but actually, when we're speaking to estate agents up and down the country in areas around the border regions, again, west of the Shannon, where they'd have very low entry and exceptionally high rents. So actually the yields do make sense. They're still not attracting a high level of investors. No. And so actually there's a policy, you know, there's a policy that hasn't been supportive of landlords over the past decade, and there isn't any line of sight that that's going to change. So actually it's interesting, even with very low entry costs, still high rents, so you can actually look at achieving much better yields. Most of those markets are still not attracting. It's still not attracting investment. But but
I suspect that's to do with though, like interest, like as in what they pay in tax. Yeah. Also the rules that they become so strict now. They're almost working against the landlords. And look, I'm not trying to decide anyone here at all. However, this is the feedback I'm getting from those who have considered it.
Oh, look, you're absolutely right. And actually, that's been very well documented now by the Irish Property Owners Association. You know, they've been very clear in terms of not just the taxation, and that's always been a problem, but actually the now increasingly burdensome and very onerous regulations attached to being a landlord. And quite frankly, we're in an interesting political year where it's unclear what the makeup of the next political what the next government is going to look like. But there is a strong sense that it is not going to get better for landlords in the foreseeable future. So I mean that's and it's such a loss. The loss to the rental market, particularly outside of Dublin, because at least in Dublin you do have a PRS sector that's operating, you know, similarly but to a lesser extent in Cork. But the reality is you don't have it in Limerick, you don't have it in Galway, and you definitely don't have it in regional towns. Actually, it's a real loss to the private rental sector, but we're not going to change policy today. But let's talk about maybe those who are homeowners. So do you tend to deal with many first-time buyers, or is it again people trading up or down?
It'll be across the board, actually, Carol, interestingly enough. So maybe I'll start with the first-time buyers. So there's plenty of them, and they have a huge appetite to settle in the area that I'm based in. Majority of them are from the area I'm based in, and they are in very good jobs. They're getting they're well educated, they're well paid, and they're able and can secure good, strong mortgages, but also it's feeding into it too with their strengths in being able to buy a property in the areas I'm based in, is that the fact that their families, their parents are now starting to, I notice, help out a bit more, and
Really? Yeah.
perhaps probably giving their inheritance to their children earlier than they might have expected to ensure that their children and grandchildren are settled in the area close to them and are settled near the good schools and the infrastructure that's there.
I mean, and of course that makes sense. And as a parent, if you could do that, you would want to do it. But actually, it really is symptomatic of how broken the property market is, that's required, that you need to tap in to intergenerational wealth. And I suppose the interesting thing is that a lot of that intergenerational wealth would have been created simply by the parents being in a position to own their own home, or to buy their own home a couple of decades ago. And it feels like maybe that's an opportunity that our current generation of first-time buyers are really losing out on, or the people who age-wise might be potentially in that bracket, but earning capacity based on where they are currently living or where they choose to live, or if indeed they have to pay rent, they're not in a position to move home and save rent and things like that, which is obviously the case for many people. It just puts them at such a disadvantage. Is it too broad a question to ask about the budgets for first-time buyers? I mean, how big of a range are we dealing with there?
We're dealing with, say, 550,000, 600,000 euro up to about $1 million.
It is huge for a first-time buyer.
Massive.
Yeah.
Absolutely massive.
Would these be people, and again, I'm always interested in, with first-time buyers, we know that single purchasers are definitely at a disadvantage. So would you meet many single purchasers, or is it mainly where you've got two income generators coming together?
Yeah, no, I would meet, majority would be couples who are buying together, making plans for the future, and obviously the more ability to buy at the higher end, or ability to buy a property if two incomes come together. But interestingly enough, I've seen quite a number of single first-time buyers, who are perhaps working around the head office in town, Grand Canal Dock. I mean, we have those who are coming from the IT sector, looking to move out to the suburbs, because they like the quality of life that you have, kind of everything, like, for example, if you're into sea swimming and you're into sailing, even just hiking, going for walks around Kleiny Hill and Dalkey Hill, or even heading out on the weekend towards Glendalough, Wicklow, or hinterlands like that, it's easy to escape from the area that I'm based around. So I'm finding a lot of, age profile, kind of 30s to 40s. It's a huge number in that cohort buying as first-time buyers, and having the ability to do so.
Yeah, again, I would probably suggest that might be reflective of the area and the profile of buyer going in. It probably isn't reflective of areas outside of Dublin, and it's something that we're very aware of. In terms of right sizing, it's a conversation that's really happening at the moment, and I certainly get very uncomfortable when I hear about these people accused of almost rattling around in big houses. I would very much take the view your home is your home. So I know that we have, is it something like 250,000 homes where 2 bedrooms are not in regular use. So we know that people's needs change throughout their lifetime. And I think it's very unfair to say to people, your family has flown the nest, or you're now living alone, you should vacate, you're essentially taking up space. I'm really uncomfortable with that conversation. I would much rather it to be, if people choose to downsize or right size, that I think our priority shouldn't be to shame them into doing it, but our priority and policy approach should be to ensure that there's something suitable within their existing community that they would love to move into, somewhere that's even shorter walk to the facilities that they use every day, where they feel like they're in the center of their community, that they've contributed to building over the past number of decades. Is this, and because you're working in areas that would really be considered quite coveted residential neighborhoods, where there's a strong sense of community, kind of rich in social capital, do you meet many people as potential or would-be sellers who are trying to right size but stay almost in their own garden?
To answer your question, quite frankly, Carol, yes, all the time.
Yeah.
And this is something, I'm glad you brought this up, because this is something I'm extremely passionate about, in that I get so animated because I'm meeting these would-be sellers and would-be buyers, but would-be sellers who are, as you say, living in family homes. They're empty nesters. They're not using a large portion of that home, be they a couple or, circumstances that can happen. Obviously, one has passed on and moved on, and they want to sell. The trouble is, their equity, the money that they're going to be able to use to buy their smaller property, is tied up in that family home. That's the first thing. The second thing is, there's really nothing out there for them to buy. We're living longer, we're healthier for longer. And those who are, say, at an age where they're retired, they're very young. We're 60, 70, you're very young in the world we live in today. You're very agile. You don't want to go into maybe something like an apartment. You'd like to maybe move into something like a smaller townhouse, but one that will cater for, say, when family come to visit, and I mean their children and grandchildren. A lot of these homeowners have children living abroad in Australia and America and England, and they want to have the extra bedroom or two when the children come home to visit at Christmas or later on during the summer. And they want to be able to entertain as well still. They've been used to having friends around, so they want to have a reception area. But they don't need, say, 3,500 or even 2,500 square feet, but they do need 1,500 square feet plus at the moment. Now, their intention is to buy this property, live in it for 10 years, and then, would you believe, downsize again. So this won't be the last move. They're planning to move again into maybe something smaller, like, as I mentioned before, an apartment. But there's nothing there available for them to buy. And even when it comes to the market to buy, they can't buy it because they're up against it. They're making their offers on condition of selling their own property, which will take, between going for sale to handing the keys over, will take 4 to 6 months.
So
Michelle, a vendor won't take the risk.
But that's so interesting around the planning a second move. I've never heard that before. So would that be typical?
Yeah, starting to creep in a lot, yeah.
That's really interesting, because not only are we not serving their needs today, then we're probably not properly serving the needs that they'll have in a decade in terms of the type of apartment they want.
Correct, yeah, absolutely, 100% correct, yeah.
Do any of the sellers you're meeting with, sellers or would-be sellers, do they consider things like building onto, because I'm familiar with some of the areas in which you work, and I know that there is there would certainly be a lot of large gardens. So actually, from that perspective, would people consider building ancillary dwellings, muse homes? I've just spent the last few days at the Academy of Urbanism conference up in Galway, where we were looking at European exemplars, and we're talking about developing compact, greater density, but kind of more compact settlements. And one of the proposals is that to not just increase supply, to increase density, but also to improve affordability, is to allow homeowners, if there is space on their own land, to be able to create these ancillary dwellings. And so whether it's for them to right size into and then free up the existing home, either for a family member or essentially for the next generation coming in, is that something that any of the sellers you're talking to are considering?
It is an option for a lot of them. However, when they invite me and any of my colleagues out to discuss this and go through the figures and facts, and if you do build in your garden, how much of an impact is this going to have on the value of the existing home? Can you build before you sell? Because in all honesty, Carol, any buyer out there at the moment looking at this big garden and the fence dividing you and it, and they're kind of going, well, you want how much for this house? And then you're going to build a house in the back garden, but how high is it going to be? Are they going to have windows overlooking me? And no matter how much you explain to them, and I can't say I blame a buyer until they see something. They can't really visualize it. And I'm as guilty. I'm the same. I prefer to see something built, done, finished, and then decide how much of an impact it's going to have,
Well,
So,
there is an interim step there, and actually it's something that is absolutely being championed by government at the moment, and this is this 3D approach to planning, so that you can, and taking that a step further, like one of the projects we're involved in is actually where you can bring proposed developments to life using immersive technologies like augmented or extended reality. So actually people would be able to stand on the site of a proposed development. They're seeing the existing context. They're seeing the roof. They're seeing the roof line. They're seeing the tree line. They're seeing the current garden, but they're also seeing the proposed development come to life true to scale. So you can see where it's going to be overshadowed. In fact, you can even track things like daylight and sunshine throughout the day and at different times of the year. So actually, there are increasingly ways to be able to truly visualize, not like through something as kind of generic as CGI images, or because they can be quite unhelpful. And even virtual reality, it's virtual reality, it's not reality. Whereas actually, if you can take that into mixed or extended reality, you can actually show context for people so they can truly get a picture of the scale and therefore the impact of any development like that. And it might just be something that could help solve this interim problem, because I feel like the funding mechanisms should be an easier step to solve in terms of being able to fund a build while waiting to sell your own home. But actually, it's the supporting policy around planning and our approach to housing policy. And something like this could really meet some of the key objectives that our current government has in terms of delivering homes. And it could be a very quick route to delivering new homes that actually qualify as compact, high density, that could actually improve affordability. So it seems like something that could be done. But we've a housing crisis, but it doesn't feel like a crisis because there just doesn't seem to be any sense of urgency around policy changes.
I'd agree with you. One point I would bring up with you about the option of being there for a vendor to build in the garden. Not only is it a financial thing in that they can't afford to build before they sell, but also if they did find a buyer who's willing to, I suppose, take on board the fact that there's going to be a construction site beside them, that buyer is also in the back of the mind going to go, hang on, how long is this going to be underway with regard to work, noise, dust? I'm going to be living beside a building site for how long? What kind of discount are you going to give me for this? And it starts becoming extremely tricky.
Do you think this might be something that would be more straightforward if it was, say, a family member looking to do this?
Absolutely. And I've seen that happen whereby a family member maybe builds the house, the back garden, and it might be a bit of a swap, as in the parents are the ones that go into the smaller property, and then the offspring, they live in the main family home. Yes, it has. I've seen that happen. Not as much as it should, maybe, but it does happen. Yeah.
I'm conscious of time and I know we have to wrap up, but I'm also very aware that there will be people listening in who are hoping to buy or perhaps thinking of selling in the areas that you've described there. And it can be quite confusing for people in terms of mixed messaging, some mixed media coming through, maybe people not fully understanding what's happening in the marketplace. What kind of advice would you have for people, first of all, who are thinking of buying, and then maybe for anybody who is currently considering selling, but wanting to stay in the area?
Yeah, well, I mean, look, for buyers, there's never a good time to buy, right? It's again, over 25 years, I've been involved in unpredictable markets. It's never a good time to buy. You buy when you feel it's really right for you, and the earlier you can buy, the better, because you've got a longer time to pay it off, right? Um, if you do see something you like, don't be shy, make an offer on it, right? The worst you'll hear is no, and the agent will guide you. When you hear no, they'll say, look, they're not going to take this offer from you. The instructions we have are to refuse your offer. However, the asking price is this. Maybe if you come up a bit more.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, there are many situations at the moment due to lack of supply where you're getting yourself involved in bidding wars or competitive bidding situations, and that's unfortunately part of the market environment right now due to shortage of properties. Put your best foot forward, have yourself prepared, and whatever you do, don't delay in responding to the agent. In that, don't drag it on for 2 or 3 days before you come back to them, because don't forget, we do represent the vendors. We are here to help you, but whatever impression we get from the way you might conduct yourself, that is being fed back to the vendor, and if it's fed back in a negative way, in that, if, say, you're involved in a bidding situation and there's two other parties bidding against you and you decide to wait for 2 or 3 days to see the other two do, you're giving off the wrong impression. You're not committed enough to buying this house. You're also giving the impression that you may be bidding on multiple properties. Maybe you are. That's fine. We expect that. But instill confidence in us and the vendors that you are committed to their home, because at the end of the day, it's their palace. They want to make sure they're meeting somebody or selling somebody who thinks their house is as beautiful as they do, which is fair enough. And of course you will.
And you brought up an interesting point there. And actually, should buyers let you know if they're bidding on another property?
It's helpful, right? It's a conversation that I believe you should have with said agent. Just say, look, by the way, I'm bidding on something else, okay? This is my preferred property. I really would love to be successful in bidding in this property, but you must understand that obviously the market the way it is and such a shortage being there, I don't want to lose out on something else as a backup plan in case I miss out on this one, which is fair enough. And I think agents are receptive of that in a very good, positive sense. So, well, certainly for me, I would rather hear that than find somebody dragging their heels because they're waiting for the other agent on the other side, wherever they're bidding elsewhere, to come back to them on that. It gives a wrong impression.
Yeah.
And that's fed back then to the vendors. So, you're not helping yourself, in other words. Something that started creeping into the market again on our end is going to best and final offers, like sealed bid situation. We don't like doing that, but if we find there are a number of parties bidding on a property and 2 or 3 parties are maybe we're unsure of or are not conducting themselves in a manner that we see being in a positive light, we might go to the best and final offer situation. Because then the best and final offer situation isn't always the highest bid. It can be maybe who we feel is the better buyer. So, if you find yourself going down that route, that chances are it's because there's just maybe 1 or 2 parties who we're unsure of. And we don't like doing that to anybody. So that's feeding into best and final offer situations.
And buyers absolutely hate that. They absolutely hate it. But actually, I'm really glad I know this is hopefully a helpful note to finish on, but you've just touched on something really important that I'm not sure buyers are aware of, and that best offer isn't necessarily highest offer. And actually, this is where positioning yourself as not just, I mean, you talked about being prepared and put your best foot forward, but actually being prepared means actually having everything in order, but also showing that you're very committed to completing on this property. And actually that's your point on how you conduct yourself really can position, how you can genuinely position yourself as the best bidder, even if you're not the highest bidder, because you are not making an offer that's conditional on anything perhaps other than an engineer's report.
Yeah, exactly. Or you might say you walked someone through who was a builder if you're looking at a house that needs work. You don't need to have a full survey done. That's too expensive for us to demand or request.
Yeah.
But even if you say you had a builder through it, you've been looking for a while. Don't get too emotional. I see plenty of these advices on TikTok and Instagram. And yes, I am on those social media platforms, Carol. Yes, not too old just yet. And I see these advices going on, write an appealing emotional letter to the vendor. Doesn't work.
Okay, very good.
How you conduct yourself in the bidding process, that's how.
That's how you work. Well, look, I am delighted to hear that you're on TikTok and other social media channels, because actually my strong sense is that everybody, every estate agent, auctioneer, buyer's agent, they should all be on TikTok and telling us about what their experiences is, or what their experience is on a day-to-day basis. So actually, people who are thinking of buying and selling can really learn from that in real time, which we love. And so just, I suppose, final question there in terms of, I suppose, the future pipeline for the area. Have you any advice for people who are really confused about selling, thinking that they are considering selling, but they just don't see an option for where they're going to go while staying in the area? Is there anything, have you any ray of light or hope that you can offer to them?
I think, unfortunately, I don't really have a huge ray of light, I'm afraid, Carol. It is a risk that one needs to take if one has decided this is the year to sell, or be it next year, the year after. It's just, you take a chance. A good news story is that I had a conversation in February with a couple who have 3 small young children in national school, 2 dogs and a cat. And they wanted to sell. They were looking at me going, what's for sale? What's for sale for us to buy? You know, this couple and their children had a very healthy budget, okay? They did very well in selling their own house. And I promised them in February, I'll find you a house by June. We got to May, Carol, let me tell you, I was sweating because we hadn't found a house.
That's a dangerous promise to
make.
I know. Marketplace.
It is a very dangerous thing to do. And as my mother would say to me back in the day, promises are made to keep fools happy, Michelle. What were you at? So I promised them, I said, I promise you, the house that you want to buy will come on the market kind of end of April, May, June. Got a phone call, start of May, and this, by the way, this couple were my clients too. So we got a very good price for them, closing in July, and they were going, scratching their heads at, what are we going to do, Michelle? Like, the kids are still in school, 2 dogs, a cat. Nobody wants to rent to us because they don't want the dogs. That's another issue. And the rental market is absolutely just, if you think supply and selling and buying at the moment is low, rental market is absolutely shocking. Not really an option, unfortunately. Now, there's still plenty out there, but not as much as we'd like. So this couple promised them. Thankfully, 2 weeks ago, we found them a house. They've signed the contract. They're moving in, and around the same time they're closing on their own house. So I'm delighted my promise came true.
Well, I'm delighted for them. I'm delighted for you. But will you be making a promise to anybody in the foreseeable future like that?
I'm not sure my heart will take it, Carol, to be honest with you, or the stress levels or the anxiety. Sorry, to answer your question in full, look, if you buy and sell in the same market, you can't lose out. Whether houses go up or go down, they tend to, mirror in every end of the market. If you go and sell and buy in the same market, you won't lose out. Okay.
That is such an important point to make, and I'm actually going to turn that ever so slightly to say that people who are selling can't expect that they will be able to sell at a premium and then buy at a discount. They're operating in the same marketplace as their buyer is.
Correct. It's all relative,
and so actually I'm really glad that you made that point. And for the rest of the day, I will have your mother's words ringing in my ear. Promises are made to keep fools happy. So actually that's maybe a timely reminder for all of us. Michelle, thank you so much. Thank you so much for all the information. It's just so important that people who are thinking of buying and selling have access to information. It's something that has changed over the last 25 years and something that we want to encourage. So thank you so much for playing your part and sharing so openly, because it means now we're able to let people know what's happening in real time, so they're not waiting for the next quarterly report. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it. So that's all we've time for today. But my thanks to Michelle Kealy, Divisional Director with Lisney, Sotheby's International Realty. My thanks, as always, to producer Katie Tallon and to the production team at Hear Me War Media, and indeed to our show sponsor, daft.ie, Ireland's most visited property website. And thank you indeed for tuning in. We'll catch you on the next episode of the Property Roundup. In the meantime, please be sure to check out all of the other Irish and international real estate and construction shows here on iPropertyRadio.com.